Good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is Dr. Martha Simmons with another session of preaching and preachers. Can't talk today on Facebook Live and on YouTube. Good afternoon. Good morning to my people on the West Coast who tune in early to watch me. Shout out to the people in the Midwest, certainly to the people in the East Coast and those in the dirty South. Come on in and let me know that you are out there. All of Dr. Stephen Ray's people, uh, make sure you're on the Facebook page, Dr. Martha Simmons, or the YouTube page. Either one of those will allow you to see the broadcast and to give comments. Come on in. I see folk coming in. All right. It is a sunny day in Atlanta, and I'm hoping the same wherever you all are. When you come in, type in the name of another person who you know needs to view this broadcast. Wendell Craig Wood, it's good to have you with me. Meredith White Zeger, uh, good to see you. When you come in, type in the name of another person who you know needs to see this broadcast, and they can tune in live right now, or it'll be up on Facebook for 2 weeks and they can watch it in their leisure. Be up on YouTube for about a year so people have time to watch it. Come on in and let me know that you are out there. All right. Folk are coming in. And also put your questions in the chat. Rachel Boyd, put your questions in the chat. Oh, no, that's Sheila Ray Dick. All right. All right.
Sheila, my sister.
Right. All right. I love her and her precious daughter, Carol Freeman. Good to have you with me. Okay. 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 All right, folk are really coming in. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started because I want to give my amazing guest as much time as I can. As always, let us pray for those who are sick. Let us pray for those uh, who are experiencing a season of bereavement. And let us pray for freedom fighters all over the world. Let us pray. Thank you for joining me on Facebook and YouTube today. Join me on May 19th, not next Monday. Gonna take some birthday time off. But on May 19th, join me for a special broadcast on technology and AI with Reverend D.K. Hammond, Reverend Justin Lester, and Fallon Wilson, the brilliant Fallon Wilson. You don't want to miss that if you have any interest in technology or AI. But let's get to today's broadcast: Black theology and white nationalism. Black theology and white nationalism. And I have two men I so admire with me today. They were kind enough to grace us. Let's begin with the Reverend Dr. Obery Hendricks. He's a lifelong social activist. He's one of the foremost commentators on the intersection of religion and political economy in America. He's widely read. He's a lecturer. You've seen him on CNN, MSNBC, CBS, Fox Business, the Discovery Channel, PBS, Japan Television. He's Bloomberg. You name it, you have seen him. His best-selling book, The Politics of Jesus. I should have pulled that out, but he knows I have it. The Politics of Jesus, Rediscovering. There you go. Rediscovering the true revolutionary nature of Jesus's teachings and how they have been corrupted. It's a must read. It's just a must read. If you are in church or interested in church, you especially for times like these. Okay. I went back, I was working on an upcoming sermon, and I had to go back to that book. I had to go back because it keeps us centered in times like these when we're talking about Jesus, and certainly when we're talking about things like racism and white nationalism and Christian nationalism. That was followed by Christians against Christianity. How right wing evangelicals are destroying. See, he's doing my work for me. Thank you for that.
Yeah, well, I have them right here on my
But you
desk.
know, I
So
got that one too. How right wing evangelicals are destroying our nation and our faith. He is currently a visiting scholar at Columbia in the Department of Religion and the Department of African and African American Studies. He's also, make sure I got this right. Are you still a visiting professor at Union in New York?
no, no.
No. Okay.
Since
Okay.
then, I was visiting at Yale, but I've
Okay.
finished with that too. So I'm just
Okay,
Columbia.
okay. He's just all over the place. He's an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and he is a graduate of Princeton, where he earned the MDiv, the MA, and the PhD. Then we have the one and the only, the Reverend Dr. Stephen Ray. He is the senior minister of the historic United Church on the Green in New Haven, Connecticut. He began that role in 2023. He was also the esteemed 13th president of Chicago Theological Seminary, a seminary related to the United Church of Christ, and he's a past president of the Society for the Study of Black Religion. He's an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, and he has been a pastor and an interim pastor at several wonderful churches. His academic appointments are numerous. He's worked at so many places. He is a prolific author as well. He received the MDiv from Yale, summa cum laude. Not thank you, Lottie, but summa cum laude. He received the PhD in theology and African American studies from Yale as well. His books include A Struggle from the Start, The Black Community of Hartford from 1639 to 1960, and Do No Harm, Social Sin and Christian Responsibility. He's co authored many, many books. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
All righty.
May I also add, I don't
Go
want to
ahead.
just short shrift. I was president of Payne Theological Seminary. I want to give a shout out to
Absolutely,
Payne
absolutely.
Theological
Shout out to Payne.
Seminary.
Two, two presidents. Two presidents. Yes, definitely. I'm sorry, I deleted that. All right, omitted that. Let's just get to the subject for today, and let me begin it this way. With Dr. Ray, let's begin with some definitions. You know, often we throw out terms and we assume that everyone either knows what we mean or that we all mean the same thing. And that's not always the case. So, define for us both Black theology and white Christian nationalism. And then we'll have Dr. Hendricks to do the same thing.
Okay, thanks so much. Honored to be here with you. So, when I talk about Black theology, it is a very specific theological movement that began with James Cone in the mid 20th century. So, it's not just theology done by Black people, it is very explicitly a liberationist theology begun by Dr. Cone that's been picked up by several theologians, myself included, and we are into the third generation of people who are explicitly
Mhm.
doing that work. So it's not simply theology done by Black people, it is an explicit form of theology done for the liberation and freedom of Black people. Now, when I
All
talk
right.
about white nationalism, one of the things I need to be clear about is that white nationalism is not the same thing as white supremacy. Right?
That's
White
right.
supremacy is the idea that people simply need to know their place. And as
Mm,
long as people know their place, then society can function fine. But white nationalism is in itself an eliminationist discourse, in
mm.
that it's not simply knowing your place, it is that you have no claim on the goods of society save for what other people give you. And once you begin to proceed as if you are citizens with full rights, then there is no place for you within society. So I just want to be
Whoa.
clear that when I talk about white nationalism, fundamentally I read it as an eliminationist discourse,
Hmm.
ideology, and all of the theologies that come out of it. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but as it gets appropriated by white evangelicals, it's actually making sure that God does their dirty work by having no place for us in heaven.
Whoa. Oh, my goodness. Okay. Dr. Hendricks.
Mhm.
Dr. Hendricks, define for us Black theology and white Christian nationalism.
Well, I defer to my colleague on Black theology because I'm not a theologian, but I think it is important to be clear that it is a specific discipline, theological
Mhm.
discipline, and it's not just Christianity in blackface. Yeah, and it's supposed to be liberationist. Well, it is liberationist. Uh, Many churches claim that they're black theology churches, but they're not
Hmm.
liberationist churches.
My God.
So that's
Mhm.
white Christian nationalism. Christian nationalism says that America was founded as a Christian nation, and God meant it to be a Christian nation. The white Christian nationalism, there's a substrat. Well, no, there's a uh, an inextricable component of white supremacy, and
Hmm.
their notion uh, of 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 the America that God made. Um, uh, like Stephen said, has us in a certain role, a certain subsidiary role. So it's a supremacist discourse, and white Christian nationalism began in its recent instantiation. It began um, really in the '80s with the whole brouhaha over Bob Jones University losing their tax exempt status because of their racial politics, and evangelicals jumped in and supported it. And evangelicals will say that this this push now started with Roe v. Wade, but that's a lie. It started with their support of white supremacist sensibilities. Roe v. Wade actually, um, white evangelicals, white nationalists supported Roe v. Wade for about 3, 4, 5, 6 years. So
Yeah.
yeah, so it's very important. Remember also, white Christian nationalism is an ideology, um, and ideology is about interest. So it's about serving the interests of white folks first,
Hmm.
and if it is consistent with Christianity in any way,
Hmm.
then 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 they'll then they will honor Christianity. But the Bible and every Christian doctrine other than supremacist doctrine, they're secondary to white supremacist interests in white Christian nationalism.
All right. Hmm. No doubt. Okay, so that starts us off. So we've got foundational definitions. So we know what it is, Dr. Ray. How do we begin? And I mean we know it's thick into the soul of this country. So how do we start to eviscerate this scourge of white Christian nationalism? Give me some steps, not just necessarily academic steps, but
Right.
give me some steps.
Well, first, let me start by saying that what makes it so difficult for us
Mhm.
to engage it is that white Christian nationalism has an allure to the mainstream of Christianity within the United States,
Hmm.
such that they see so much of themselves in it that it becomes difficult to extricate themselves from it. So, I mean,
Mm.
that's the first piece. That's why it becomes so difficult. But if we're going to be looking at practical steps, I think number one is that you have got to be an iconoclast. In any and every place possible, you have to destroy the idea that somehow when you're reading the Bible, you're reading a story of white people. I mean, that
Mm.
is the core of mainstream Christianity in
That's right.
America, and it's the core of white Christian nationalism, that the Bible is fundamentally a story of white people. So,
Yeah.
however you do that, sermonically, as well as being attentive to what kind of literature you have in your church, what kind of images you're showing your children, what your
Right.
stained glass windows look like, how it is that you use language. I mean, all of these things in
Yes.
church practice is one of the first steps, because the point is our culture over and over again reinscribes the ideal. So you have this whole series of movies that have come out called The Chosen. The last
Yes.
one just came out, and it was The Last Supper. You
Mm.
have all of the stories, The Last Temptation of Christ. I mean, I could just go down the line. But the idea that the Bible is a story of white people is the foundation of white Christian nationalism. And until you begin to do the work of consistently destroying that image,
Yes.
and, and for the major reason that I ran across a phrase that I thought was very powerful a couple of weeks ago, is that the most powerful tool that the oppressor has is the mind of the oppressed.
My
So,
goodness.
so as until you begin to deconstruct that in the imaginations of not just Black Christians, but all Christians, then
Yes.
we keep fighting the same battle over and over
Over
again.
each generation. It's amazing how hard it is to get people to understand that the Bible is an Afro-Asiatic book. It's a book of Afro-Asiatic people. It's amazing how difficult that is. Even if you look at the locations of all of the cities and towns in the Bible, it's
Mhm.
just hard to get people to, because uh such a good job has been done of brainwashing people. Uh, Dr. Hendricks, how do we start to eviscerate this scourge
Mhm.
of
Yeah,
white
yeah.
Christian nationalism?
First, let me say, and you use the term Afro-Asiatic, and I think it is important. Just sort of an addendum. This notion of Afro-Asiatic actually also came out of white supremacist um, historiography, sort of uh, combining all of the cultures together. But it's still useful. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I guess that's just my
Yeah.
academic
Yep. Yep.
coming.
You're right. You're
But
right.
how? Well, first, Steve made a good point. But one thing is, we don't see ourselves. Black folks don't see themselves in the gospel, in the biblical story, particularly because of the King James version of the Bible. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Mhm,
Lord have
um,
mhm.
mercy.
all that, the these and thous and all that. And, when you read that, it makes you think of Shakespeare or Elizabethan people. So, one thing is we have to drop the King James Bible, right?
Hmm.
And then pay attention to what Dr. Simmons was saying, and that is, locate the characters, you
Yeah,
know, on the globe, so folk can see. Man, these people were, they were right. They were in Africa or on the cusp of Africa, right?
that's right.
That's important. But I think more importantly, we have to reclaim and reproclaim what the gospel is about. The gospel is not about the core of the gospel is not confess your mouth and believe in your heart and you'll be saved. It's not for God so loved the world and gave his only begotten son. The core of the gospel, Jesus said, is love your Lord your God, all your heart, soul, mind, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. You can't have a cross without both of them. But on a social level, the greatest social commandment is love your neighbor as yourself with all
That's
of
right.
its all of its profound implications. But but it's not just about sentiment, right? It's like want for your neighbor the same goods, the same freedom of mind, the same freedom of body, soul, and spirit, and so forth, and the material goods for your neighbor as you want for yourself and your own loved ones. But there's another implication. That is that it is about it's because everybody of sound mind will struggle for the best for themselves and their own loved ones. It's also a commandment to struggle for the best for our neighbors.
That's right.
So what it also means, so that commandment is, when you look at it, is to struggle for the common good, and
Yes.
then we have to reclaim that Jesus talked about a new commandment to love one another and all that. What I'm getting at is that we have to reclaim and reproclaim what the gospel is about, and juxtapose the white Christian nationalism against that. See, the problem is, I think, is that they've been doing their job a lot better than we've been doing ours.
My God.
On our end, we don't really, and aligned with that, we have to raise the consciousness in the church, which aligns also with what Dr. Ray was talking about. We have to raise the consciousness of the people, which means that the pastors need to pay attention to what it means to tend your sheep. They have, that means you have to struggle. You have to teach your people. Well, to feed the sheep, of course, is to feed them on all kinds of levels, but it's also to to make them aware of what's going on. But tending to sheep means also protecting them, and what that means is pastors got to read and got to understand what's happening in this society, because you can't protect the sheep if you don't know what are the forces, the policies, the actors that are really assailing the sheep. So we need to so pastors have to really take seriously what it means to love your neighbor as yourself, what it means to tend the sheep, and we have to proclaim and proclaim and reclaim the core of the gospel for what it is. Because when we focus on the core of the gospel, that's about actions. That's about doing something, not just having a half hour, 45-minute praise service. It's about changing. So I mean, those are some of the basic things.
Just
Well, if I could say one thing, Dr. Simmons,
you can say two things.
At least two.
Well, I think one of the challenges, and this is why it's so important for us to continue to maintain partnerships between the pulpit and the classroom and the world, is that most Black pastors are like triage doctors, in that they find themselves, if you think about that old program MASH, right, is that they have people who come in wounded deeply each and every Sunday. But here's the key, is that they are in a triage setting where the people who come wounded, the system that wounded them is continuing to wound them while they're in the triage unit. If you can get a message, if you can get an image in your mind of someone being shot, brought to the emergency room, but then the person who shot them comes in right behind them and keeps shooting them. Right, that's what so many Black pastors are dealing with. So there's a significant way that if we don't have a vibrant partnership between folk who are teaching, folk who are thinking, folk who are doing community organizing in the world, as well as the folk who are doing the triage work for our people, right? The triage work of helping people maintain their humanity, their dignity, their sense of themselves. Because in so many of our churches, if a pastor has been able to get folk to the end of Sunday service on Sunday night so that they can face Monday morning feeling like they are somebody, and feeling like there's somebody with an inherent dignity that needs to be respected, they have done a yeoman's work. Because everything in the lives of so many of our people is an assault on the basic humanity that we have and the sense that we're someone worthy of dignity.
No, that's a good point, Martha. He's talking, as Oval said, he's talking good. It's important
for real.
But it's because So we're talking about symptoms and causes, Stephen, and I like that
Mm-hmm.
analogy. As you clear up, you fix one bullet hole, and he's giving one right behind it. Um, but part of that also, tending the wounded is, I think, part of the perspective should be to tend the wounded so they can go back into the war, and
Mm-hmm.
get marching orders. And what, like yourself, I've been around a while, and I've been all over the country at churches, and I was on the general board of the AME denomination. I've seen a lot, and what I see very little is people being empowered to do what the gospel tells us to do, and that is to change. That is to change the world. The
Yes, yes.
perspective
World
is,
changers.
it has to be. It has to be both. Now, you're a pastor, and you've been a pastor before. I've not been a pastor, so I'm talking as an activist who is ordained and who's worked through the church. But I do know this, that we can praise as much as we want, and I know you agree with that point. And that's going to change the way we feel. That's not going to change much of anything else. And on the other hand, tending the wounds of the wounded is important, but it's also giving people perspective that we're also supposed to be Christian soldiers. We sing about it.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody has a different role to play as a Christian soldier. Not everybody's going to be on the front lines, but everybody should be thinking about, we're called not to change just how people feel, but also how they think, but how they act, and to change the world. And see, that's
Mm-hmm.
the problem with what's going on in the church these days, because that's and this is a function of white supremacists, Stephen. I think of that white supremacist Christianity. Um, Christianity, from the time of Constantine, has always been aligned with the ruling powers, and white supremacist Christianity in America is the same thing, and it hides the importance of struggling in the world. So in a way, it's an
Mm-hmm.
anti-gospel, right? It's an anti.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about working for good news. It's about just learning to suffer through the bad news better.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And that's really important because for a long time and even sometime today, we keep teaching people how to suffer better,
Yeah.
just how to suffer better. No matter how bad things are, we keep teaching them how to suffer better. And we don't ever help people figure out, well, if you're getting shot, let's try some bulletproof vest.
Yeah, or something. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I use that metaphorically, of course.
Mhm.
But let's try some ways to strengthen you. But Dr. Ray, you're absolutely right. If you can get people from Sunday to Sunday to just a point of hope and belief that I need to go out again, out into the rough world and do my part, although I'm going to get shot at. Dr. Ray, you looking like you want to say something else. Go
Can I
ahead.
can I just say
Well,
before Stephen? Let me just say,
mm-hmm.
I want to make sure that because I should have said this. Yes, some people are so wounded that they're going to be wounded. They're not going to be they. It's going to be all they can do, right,
Yeah,
to make it from week to week. I'm not, and I want to acknowledge the importance of that. I didn't want to give that short shrift, but there are a lot of folk who got who got a lot of skills and a lot of power who can
that's
be
right.
energized to do stuff. So I guess it's a balancing act.
Right.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things, and I draw so much of my view from the civil rights movement is that I'm always careful when I critique the kinds of Christian faith that is rooted in this idea of the church being a healing house so people can have hope and hold on, because the people who were the foot soldiers of
Mm-hmm.
the civil rights movement were folk who sat under that kind of preaching their
That's
entire
right.
lives.
That's
And
right.
when the moment came, and here I draw back to the biblical image of Exodus, right?
Yeah.
Those people have been living in bondage for 400 years.
Yeah.
But when Moses came and said, now is the time, we're leaving in the morning, those
Mm.
same people who had just been able to hold on for a couple of 100 years, when they heard the call and heard it in a voice that they could understand, heard it as the voice of God, those were the folk who picked up on that next morning and in sunrise walked out of Ramses and Pithon, right? They were the ones who got up. And so I always want to hold on to that idea
Mhm.
is that one of the ways that, and this is the theologian speaking in me, one of the things that history teaches us is that we have to be prepared for when God moves. Because
Mm-hmm.
when God moves, if we are prepared, then people who normally would never have been engaged in a protest find themselves walking out the front door of their church to
All
face
right.
down the dogs of Bull Connor. People who normally would not have went to the town hall find themselves following Fred Shuttlesworth because those foot soldiers had been prepared and were building an inner strength. And I mean, why I think that's so important at this moment, and then I'll stop,
Don't stop.
is that
Mm.
we are suffering defeats now that will take 2 generations to recover.
Yes, Lord. My God.
And part of our work is to give each of those generations what they need so that they're able to keep fighting. And when the moment comes that Moses, who, or whether it is Miriam, either one, when they say, we are leaving in the morning,
Yeah.
so put the blood over your doorpost and pack
Mm.
up your bags,
Mhm.
that our folk are ready.
Mhm.
All
Well,
right.
I
All
would
right.
suggest that we're not that, and I'm speaking very generally, that the church is in general is not preparing people on a widespread basis to heed the call. Number two, the call has to be given, right? And
Yeah.
and right now is a time. If there was never a time in our lifetimes, other than the civil rights movement, this is the time that the call has to be given. And the
Has to
problem
Mhm.
is,
be.
so many folk in pulpits don't know how to give the call. They don't even know what the call is.
Yeah.
The Project 2025 gave a great vision. Those people were clear. It was an evil vision, but
Yeah. But
they
it
were
was clear.
clear on what they want to do. We talk about what our vision of people perish and all that, but what kind of vision are we offering? What kind of political economy
Mhm.
we should have? Martin Luther King, he never fleshed it out, but he implied a democratic socialist political economy, which is much more consistent with the Bible than capitalism. Um,
Mhm.
and what kind of educational system do we want? They're clear. So again, um, we're treating the symptoms well, but the church is so few churches are treating the causes, aware of the causes. How can you have a pastor who is not conversant with how capitalism works
My
or
God.
how socialism works? I mean, the two major polarities in the of political economy that affect the people. How can you have pastors who don't read newspapers every day and pay attention to what's happening? So that's why they've been winning. They're going to continue to win till we get up and do something better. They are winning because we let them win, and that's they deserve the win because they're putting more work into it than we are. Lastly, let me say this: in terms of social, instead of what we can do, I forgot to mention J. Alfred Smith. The first time I spoke at J. Alfred Smith, I don't know,
Mhm.
25 years or so ago. I remember, well, first off, J. Alfred Smith, Stephen, to your point about partnership, um, he allowed Black Panthers to meet in his church, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was deeply involved, but also I'm in the church. It's time for the announcements, and so I'm expecting the woman's coming down. So I expect to hear about fish fries and picnics and stuff. And she starts talking about what's going on locally, on local, state, and federal levels that the people need to know about. And so, I mean, that's so much that can go on the church. There can be social action committees that summarize in bullet form in the program on Sunday the kinds of things that happen that people need to know. Those are the kinds of ways that we're going to be able to fight it. But we're not doing that, and that's why our people are suffering. And so we're not doing what Jesus said when he said, "Tend to our sheep." We're not tending our sheep we're tending the way they feel, but we're not tending to the world around them. So the wolves are coming at them now, and we're not stopping them. I'm saying us because I'm part of it too. I'm doing my part. You are, Stephen, doing a part, but in general,
We got to do more. We've got to do more.
Well, see, here's where we have a fine line, right, that
Mm-hmm.
we have to walk. And what the fine line is when he wrote The Negro Church back in 1902, I think it was, Carter
Mm-hmm.
G. Woodson raised the question, how is it that a people who prize
Yeah.
education so much, and he was talking
Mhm.
about the
Yeah.
freed slaves, seem to have so little respect for it
My
in
Mhm.
their pulpits? And
Mhm.
what he said was that because too often they've had the experience that when they send people, their young
right.
men at that time, to learn, the one thing that they learn superlatively is to despise the very people that
Mm.
sent them.
Mm.
And so the Black anti-intellectualism, which we talk about within the Black church, Woodson talks about as part of the line we have to walk is how do we critique and talk to church leadership in a way that doesn't reflect the way in which they are demeaned and diminished in the
Mhm.
larger culture. So we become really those who are not there to help them, but to actually undermine them. So, how does our discourse not walk that fine line? Because I think that it's very true that we need to challenge, we need to hold people to account, but then we also have to ask, how can we do that work when the majority of Black pastors have another full-time job? Right? A majority of Black pastors have a family. The majority of Black pastors have civic organizations which they are expected to have leadership roles in. How do we create the opportunity to develop the critical consciousness that you're talking about, Dr. Hendricks? And I mean, because I agree with you 100%, but I think part of the challenge is we can assume that we're talking to a clergy that is working full time, has benefits, and has a full salary. But that's not what most Black
Absolutely.
preachers are
It
doing.
absolutely is not. But I also think, Dr. Ray, um, even though I well know, I've talked about it many times, that a large numbers and the numbers have really increased in the last 5 years of pastors work two jobs. No, and some of the itinerant systems make it almost necessary because they're going to give you 30 people and then say change the world and
10
feed
people.
your family.
10
Okay.
people.
Well, the
Well,
median number
AME. I mean,
that,
that's a thing.
okay, that number is still 30 even at AME.
Okay.
And so it becomes very difficult. It becomes very difficult for pastors to do some of the leadership. But I guess my concern is the number of pastors we have, as Dr. Hendricks said, who won't get the basic information.
Mm.
They
Well,
just they won't get the
Hmm.
basic information. We still have 40% of our pastors who've never been near a seminary.
yeah.
Never been near a seminary.
But Martha, well,
And
okay, go ahead.
let me finish. And so some of the things that they could do that our foreparents couldn't do, who didn't go to seminary, okay, are not being done. Go ahead, Dr. Hendricks.
No, you're absolutely right, and I mean that's a very important point. And I know. I mean, That's what my career is. I mean, everything I write, everywhere, is
Hmm.
trying to do that. I mean, that's why I wrote The Politics of Jesus almost 20 years ago, and I think that's why it's still so significant in so many quarters, because try to reach the people. That's important. And Stephen, you're right. We uh, it's I mean, the way we're talking now, um, uh, I wouldn't talk in a church this way, but we do have to at some point, to speak prophetically is to really speak critically at times. So, you know,
Hmm.
but one thing, I mean, one thing that we can change is we don't, you know, we got a zillion, you know, conferences, preaching conferences. Why don't we, you know, why don't we utilize some of those conferences,
And
you
make
know,
them teaching conferences, Lord
preaching
Jesus.
conferences, and also, you know, you know, to deal with the politicality of the gospel. Now, I mean, I'm gratified. I'm invited, you know, many places to, you know, to share, you know, share perspective from things that I've written. But I look at all these preaching conferences, man, where they have all the preachers, uh, 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 you know, faces on the ad, like, you know, what the old Motown package shows back in the day to show who the performers are going to be and all that, you know. And but you know, we don't see these conferences saying, you know, how do we fight white supremacy? How do we fight Trumpism? You know, how do
Exactly.
we fight fascism? I mean, those we have the capacity to do it, but the church is getting so near to celebrity, personality cult, you know, preachers and stuff, and preaching as entertainment, you know, people and all of that. I mean, that that has come to be, you know, so very important, and the way that you preach, you know, and Martha, and I know you a critic of this, big critic of this, the way you preach is more important in so many quarters than what you say.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
what I want to get on the table here, and this is really anathema to the gospel. This is
Yeah.
the opposite of what the gospel is about. We have pastoral malpractice all over the place,
Mhm.
and it is killing our people. And Donald Trump is way down the road to fascism. And what the hell? Where we talk about the black church is so big and it's so where are we? We don't, you know, we have William Barber and a few others, but you know, folk are going to Usher's annuals, but they won't go and protest. You know, our rights being taken away.
Yeah, but I think you were onto something, and I posted this early in the year and said I said it looks like we're going to have about 75 conferences this year, between conferences by men, conferences by women, conferences by nonprofits. 75. And I think you're dead on it. Why is it so difficult to say this conference is on teaching people tools for dealing with capitalism, tools for dealing with this area of Project 2025? What is it that won't let us get to some of that hard stuff at our conferences and in our churches? So Dr. Hendricks, you mentioned about being prophetic. Dr. Ray, in times like these, when I'm like you said, two generations are being impacted by what this man has done and is going to do, what does it mean to teach and preach prophetically at a time like this? What does it mean?
Mhm.
Well, I think the first thing it means is to become honest and clear about where we are at. You know, one of the things my daughter and her generation, she's 35, 36 years old, she reminded me is that her
Mm,
entire life we have been
my
losing,
God. Yep.
right? The conservatives
Yep.
have been winning her
Mm-hmm.
entire life, right? So part of what shaped the consciousness, and this is where you get the whole movement of black nihilism, as well as other kinds of movements, and being
Mm-hmm.
honest about that, because a part of what I think we've been uh, uh, preaching about and teaching about is what it was when the African Americans were
Mm-hmm.
victorious.
Yeah,
And the point
yeah.
is that the African Americans experienced our
Yeah,
signal defeat with the first
that's
election
right.
of Donald Trump. From that point on, we had to leave the fight to whoever the black
Mhm.
people were going to be. And so a part of prophetic preaching is giving voice to that so that people can actually feel like they're seen, giving voice to that reality, because then giving voice to that reality, you can begin to construct what does a vision of salvation look like for a generation who has grown up only
My
seeing
God.
us lose. What does it mean to preach a word of prophetic hope to a generation that has seen their financial lives being destroyed, such that the idea of working anywhere for your life is gone? The idea of you having a retirement is gone. The idea of you having a meaningful sort of expression of your power to vote has been under assault successfully for the last 30 years. So that's the first place, right? Is to begin to ask, what does all this mean? I think the power of Martin Luther King Jr. was that people heard their struggles in his voice. They heard when he was preaching and the vision he was giving, people felt like they
Yeah.
were being seen. People felt like
Yeah.
their aspirations. And I think too often, and this is something, that I speak directly to my generation, Dr. Simmons and Hendricks, is the African Americans as a cultural identity. We are only here to fight a rear guard action. And we have got to pass the baton on to those who will be able to give voice to this in ways that I don't know that we have the
Yeah, Lord.
capacity to do, right? Because and I think that that's the biggest challenge
Yeah.
for us today, is to recognize that we're in this moment
Mhm.
Yeah.
of transition, and that our job is to give everything we have, to use a phrase, the last
Mhm.
full measure that we have over this
Mhm.
Yeah.
next decade. And that's our teaching, that's our writing, that's our community organizing, that's our
Yeah.
church formation, so that we are able to give the next
But
generation
it's
what they
hard.
need. But
It's
if they
hard to
don't,
give
yeah,
something to the next generation.
Well, we need to model it though. That's
It
part of the problem.
Well, that's part of it too. But it's hard to give it, to model it, to teach it if your hand is not going this way. If instead the hand is standing up and you're pulling your hand this way and still saying, "But I want to hold on to my power longer. I want
Mm.
to be seen longer. I want to stay on the stage longer." So a part of that losing in the last 35 years that I've watched is people who weren't giving out the marching orders and the help and the expertise. They were just staying on the stage.
Mhm.
well, there's a critical distinction here, and I'm not trying to speak out of school now, but
Help
there are
yourself.
several people, that my good brother Obery and I know very personally, who don't know the difference between being an elder and
Oh
just
my
Mhm.
being an
God.
old person.
See,
Mhm.
see, go ahead. Go ahead.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because being an elder means that you understand that whatever you do with the time you have left is so that those who
That's
come
right.
behind you, you're making a way for them, as opposed to continually being on an ego trip where you have to
Yeah.
be out in the front. And so, no matter how many of our children
Mm,
you sacrifice, and no matter how much of their futures you allow to be eviscerated, as long as your voice is the one that's
yeah.
being pointed to, then that's the way it ought to be. So we just have to recognize that distinction, and we need to strive to
Mhm.
be
No, I
elders
think you're
and not
right.
just
And
old people.
and when I become an elder, I'm going to put that into practice. But I defer to my elders here. Thank you very much. But the prophetic. Well, one
What does
thing,
it mean to be preach prophetically,
yeah,
Dr.
one
Hendricks?
thing you pointed to is that we need new models of ministry for one
Right.
thing. Models of
Hmm.
ministry we have are
Hmm.
all
Yep.
screwed up. Personality cult stuff, entertainer stuff, faux Pentecostal stuff. Folk think that getting worked up is Pentecostal, and that's an insult to Pentecostalism. You know,
Thank you.
but so we need new. And, but in terms of the prophetic, and Stephen is absolutely correct. And prophetic but the role of the prophetic that the biblical prophets model for us is is not just speaking truth to power, which is important, but is deconstructing power, helping people to see what it is that's messing with them, that's destroying their lives, that's oppressing them, and providing what Brueggemann calls prophetic imagination, helping people imagine another way of doing things. Because part of what we see is so many people can't imagine that things can be substantially different.
Yeah, they can't imagine that you could win. It's
And
just like
exactly,
he
and
just
they
they can't
can't
imagine.
imagine that capitalism, for instance, is capitalism didn't always exist, and it won't always and it won't always exist.
Right,
So if we
right.
can't
Hmm.
imagine another way of doing things, we can't even think about a beloved community like Martin Luther King
That's
was
right. I mean, a
talking
lot
about.
of young
So there's
people,
a pastoral
yeah, they can't
responsibility.
imagine it.
Pastors have a pastoral and a prophetic responsibility, right? And it's a hard balance, I would expect, because as Stephen was saying earlier, we're talking about wounded people. Some of them are terribly wounded. Some of them
Yes,
on the point of suicide. Some folk have no self belief, and so that pastoral is so important. But then we have to have the prophetic. We have
yes,
to have where we
Hmm.
where we get together and challenge these forces that are destroying our people. The Black church has a prophetic responsibility not to engage and pastors should not engage in pastoral malpractice. We have a responsibility to try to change
Right.
the world. And I think that's the problem, is that it's not clear that the responsibility of the church is to try to transform the world, not just
yeah,
transform the
yeah.
way we feel
And
and help
some
us suffer
people,
better.
and for some churches, it is not. That's not their main responsibility. They
They think
believe
the
that
main
their
thing is praising all day long,
main it's
and praising
praise.
with your lips is not a. I mean, we're supposed to praise with our limbs. Praising with your
Yeah,
lips is it's what
yeah.
that has its
You
place.
gotta be it. Yeah, but the two go together.
Well, one's supposed to empower us and inspire us to act,
Exactly.
because that's what happened. Look at the day of Pentecost. They were scared.
Yeah,
They didn't do nothing, but Spirit came on them. They got up and went out and changed the world. That's the problem. Our notions of spirituality are mired in emotional catharsis and all of that, and that's important. People got to get that out. But that's not the biblical
you can't stay there.
spirituality. The only evidence of real spirituality is what we
Hmm.
do in the world.
Yeah,
How we try to love our neighbors as ourselves is the only evidence of whether we love God, and that just doesn't seem to to
yeah, we ain't getting that
compute.
one, and that's not the one that's showing up in our churches and at our conferences. Dr. Ray, after what happened with Trump and with the vast majority of women voting for Vice President Harris and the vast majority of Black men as well, I keep hearing people say, this is not our fight. And we've started to see the marches and the protests, but people are like, this is not our fight. Let the white folk figure this out themselves. This is not our fight. Dr. Ray, what you think?
No, it is our fight. I mean, because when white folk figure it out and we're not in the room and we're not at the table, whatever little bit we have left, we're going to
Mm,
find it is gone.
Mhm.
So it is our fight, but we have to be wise in terms of the fight. So, I mean, we have to be wise in a couple of different ways. Number one is in terms of recognizing that our people have the capacity to imagine what a verdant future will be. We don't have to rely on people who are progressives and have some sort of Marxist vision of what wholeness is when all of the working class is able to. We don't have to have all. Our people have the capacity to give a vision of wholeness. And we need to be fighting for that. We need to be clear about choosing our allies well. I mean, because one of the things that coming out of this past election, I'm finally at a place I've been for a long time now, but I'm finally here fully, is that unless you bring receipts, I'm not here for all that BIPOC
Mm,
stuff. You know,
that's
unless
right.
you bring, if you bring receipts, then I will
Yeah.
ride or die with you. But if you don't bring any receipts, I'm only going to ride or die for folk who are willing to put it on the line for Black people. And I think that there is a way, and that's where the difference is you're not setting it out, but you are saying that I'm not going to spend my energy and time on coalitions that do not prioritize the well-being
Mhm.
of Black people, that do not prioritize a future for Black children, that do not prioritize the well-being
And
of
have
our
receipts.
community. Now, anyone who wants to
Hmm.
get in the struggle and prioritize that, as I said, I will ride or die, but I don't have time for these marches that, you know, at the end of the day, Black folk are going to be
Yeah.
an afterthought.
Dr.
Yeah.
Hendricks, 92% Black women voted for Vice President Harris, and they say, you know what, we tired. This ain't our fight. Let them figure it out. What you
Yeah.
say?
No, Stephen's right. Of course, it's our fight. And Malcolm said it well. When America catches cold, Black folks get pneumonia. You know,
Mhm.
uh, you know,
What do you say to
white
the
Christian
folk are tired?
nationalism, and Trumpism.
They tired of losing.
Malcolm, Trumpism. What Trump? I lost my thought. What's
I'm saying, what do you say to the people who say
no?
we should sit
I'm
it out?
yeah. No, we should not. We shouldn't sit it out. We have to be in this fight. This is our fight. When they declared war, when they used the code word DEI, which means declare war on Black and brown people, um, we have to realize that we are in the crosshairs here. Look at everything they're doing to try to even elide our history, try to make it illegal for our
Mhm.
children to learn our own history. This is our fight more than anyone else's fight, because the vision that they have, you listen, that little punk Stephen,
Miller.
what's his name? Stephen Miller.
The
I
Miller.
mean, the things that they are doing is full fascism. Fascism does not turn out well for people of
Yeah.
color. So it is self-defeating. It's foolish, and frankly, I believe, even though, I mean, people might mean well, but it is treasonous to get our people to stand out of the battle when we are the ones that are being shot at in the battle. We have a responsibility to our children to try to stem this evil onslaught. Because Stephen is right. We've lost decades of rights already. They're trying to really go back to the pre-civil rights.
Right. The 50s.
Pre-civil.
Yeah.
They,
Mhm.
they even want to make segregation legal
Yeah.
again. So how can any Black people talk about it's not our fight? It's our fight more than anybody
Yeah.
else's
Well, I
fight.
think the people who are saying it's not our fight were just and are fatigued because a part of this. Uh,
Doesn't matter.
I hear what you're saying. I'm telling you what the people are
Ali was
saying.
fatigued, but he still beat Joe Frazier's ass. So, look, I mean, it's like an athlete in the fourth quarter. You're tired. In the football game, you've been beat up, but a lot of points get scored in the
That's
fourth
right.
quarter. We
You
have
have
to
you
fight.
you
We don't
have
have
to
a
have to fight, and I get the people who have said it. They needed to rest. I get that. Rest is a part of resistance, but it's our fight, people. It's our fight.
We've had enough time
I
to
agree.
rest.
I agree. We've got to get back in this fight because even though white folk, especially poor white folk, are going to FAFO concerning Trump and his policies, if they hit poor whites, you can imagine what they're going to do to Black and brown people. It is
Yeah, no, you're
our
right.
fight. It's no, we
Yes.
don't have to fight with all of the old tools. Everything is not a march, but it is our fight. I'm just out of time, but I gotta ask just this last question. You all will
Hmm.
indulge me. uh, Dr. Ray, I keep hearing our people say that there are too many different approaches. to the problems of Trumpism and racism, and that we'll never come together to figure this out. What are your thoughts on that?
You have to keep it simple, and the simple question is, how does this? And when I say this, what I mean is, how does
Mm-hmm.
this project, how does this community organizing, how does this preaching, how does
Yeah.
this church work contribute to building a future
Mm-hmm.
for Black children? And if you can't answer
Mm.
that question, then the struggle is not
Whoa,
worth your
whoa,
time.
whoa.
Mhm,
Dr. Hendricks,
mhm,
same
mhm.
question. We ain't gonna ever get together to figure this out. We got too many different answers, solutions, suggestions, etc. And we'll never come together to figure this out. What do you say to that?
Well, we can, yeah, come together. I mean, Stephen mentioned civil rights movement and King. There were a whole lot of voices then
That's
too,
right.
right? They
That's
were
right.
Black
Hmm.
Marxists and all kinds of, and we had Garveyites and all kind of folk. But they were able, a vanguard, you know, defined, help folk help raise people's consciousness on exactly what was happening and provided a prophetic imagination of what could be. And so I think that that can and has to happen. There, and I think it will happen. There are folks struggling now. There will emerge a vision of and an organization, and I doubt there'll be that much of a charismatic leader these days, but there will emerge a
That's right.
vanguard who will eventually bring folk together, and it could come out of the church. It doesn't have to, um, but what I think that we're seeing, and you mentioned this younger generation, I'm expecting it just like the Black Power movement. Also the Civil Rights movement to come out of the younger generation with the energy, with the
Mm-hmm.
bravery, who do not yet know how much there is to lose. When
When they fight,
teenager,
yeah,
when I was a Black nationalist soldier, I was looking to die and be on and die for the people,
yeah,
and be on a poster. But these young people are they're gonna lead the way, and I don't think it's going to come out of the church this time. I don't see how it is, because Martha, you pointed to it, and Stephen, you did too. These old heads ain't letting
no,
go,
no, they're not.
and they're
They're not.
not trying to raise up a new generation of leaders at all, and they're not trying to bring new models of ministry. They bring up preachers that they're young boys who act like they old men because they think that's what
Yeah,
they're
yeah,
supposed to
yeah.
do.
And I think, go ahead,
Well,
Dr.
I think that, and this is the last point.
Mhm.
The last point I want to make is that while it may not be the church that leads it, the church is the only institution that Black people own, lock, stock, and barrel. So, whatever the leadership is that's going to lead us forward, the Black church will be an essential part
Yeah,
of that movement,
yeah,
even if it's not at the forefront of the movement, because it remains. Besides perhaps the D9 organizations, the Black Church is the one institution that we own, lock,
Yeah.
stock, and barrel.
exactly. And that's why, for me, the Black church, with all my disaffection, with all the madness going on, Black church is my site of struggle and my site of service. That's where our people are, and that's where so many resources are. I mean, they're mostly being squandered these days, I believe. But you're right, Stephen. Let me just say one quick thing before I go. I was invited to preach when I was in my first or second semester of seminary. I was invited to preach at 8 o'clock service, which is a young people's service at a church in Trenton, New Jersey. And I thought, man, I'm gonna go in and knock them out. And I had what I thought was a sermon, the political economy of the Lord's Prayer. All right, and I went in and I was going to be all prophetic and political. Went in there and found out that this was the old folks service. I'm oh my God! So that's the only sermon I had. So I did what I could. So the old folks, they were nice afterward. Reverend, that was a nice
Oh,
talk you
mm-hmm.
gave. Blah, blah, blah. But as I'm talking, I see this elder woman, this old woman coming up the aisle on a walker. And it was a sizable church, so it took her a while to come up, and she was frowning, man. And I'm like, oh Lord, she gonna whip me. She got up to me, she said, Reverend, I always know there was something wrong with this teaching us. I'm saying, what that taught me is that our people are ready if they hear the
Yeah.
call.
Yeah.
You have to give them,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the lesson of Martin Luther King and the
Yeah.
others, right? They gave the call in a way that people could hear it, that respected the gospel, that respected their culture, respected their personhood, and the people were ready. If we do that, Stephen, yeah, we could. The church play
Yeah.
a huge major role. I want to say how honored I am to be
I
on
want
here
to
with my
read
brother
a
Stephen.
comment from the chat, and I'm trying to get this person's schedule. They retired, and now they're 5 times busier. Dr. Cheryl Townsend Jill
I
says
see that.
it doesn't
Yes.
need to come out of the church, but the church needs to equip, and facilitate for church folk to be part of the diversity of strategies and fights that are necessary for dealing with this mess. Okay. And I want to also say,
Amen.
I don't think it's going to come out of the church either. And I do think it's going to come from young people, basically 35 or younger, if not younger than that. And also, I want us to remember that movements happen, worlds change when the 3 to 4%, not the 40, not the 50, everybody make you think that they were with King now.
Yeah.
And my mentor, Dr. Gardner Taylor, used to always laugh and tell me how small their support was among so many preachers, among so many churches. And he said, but we went with what we had. And what they really had was a clear moral vision that people were willing to die for. And that's what Trump has. Okay? He has folk who are willing to go down for him. And we have to be willing to stand up, okay, to stop it and his people. God, I am just always, I'm honored that these sages would give me their time and share. And this is the kind of message. This is what folk need. So put this out. Share this video. There are people who want to do something. They're trying to figure out what. Share this video. And then join me May 19th for a great session on technology and AI. Thank you for those who are hitting my Cash App. I'm not going to be around next week. Going to do some birthday time rest. Again, last but not least, thank you to my guests. Please share this video. God bless. Everyone have a great week. And remember, this absolutely is our fight. Don't let nobody confuse you on that. I'm glad you all got some rest. But this is our fight. And if it doesn't feel personal for you, think about your children, your grandchildren, or other people's children and grandchildren. That's what we're fighting for.
And Martha, say this, me and Stephen go back to graduate school days. And we're still fighting this fight. I'm honored, brother.
As am I, my brother. As am I.
Yeah.
So God bless. Let's do it.
All right. God bless. Take care, you all.
Okay. Blessings.